Started this morning. I appreciate all the enthusiasm. It sounds like we're going to have an exciting day. All right, first up, we have some rule changes that we need to adopt. I'll let Kevin briefly go over those and then be happy to entertain a motion to adopt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is item B in your packet. These are the same rules with a few updates to make the Claims Subcommittee and the Administrative Rules Review Subcommittees consistent with the changes that were made for the council subcommittees, their corresponding subcommittees and councils. And there's also one change where the planned activities restriction is for subcommittees is eliminated. That's on the last page. That's a basic overview.
All right, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Members, do we have any questions on the rule changes? All right, seeing none, I need a motion to adopt. I've got a motion to adopt. I've got a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, motion carries. Members, before we get into the governor's balanced budget presentation, I want to talk about today and kind of how at least I hope today's committee goes. It's in two segments. The first is we'll have this presentation, and in that presentation, after it's over, there'll be a time for Q&A, and that's where you would have your questions about spending levels and what the priorities are. In particular, is how that morphs into what is eventually RSA. So if you have questions about spending levels and the priority of what we're spending, then that's going to be the time to have those discussions, is it right after they present. Then we're going to move into the appropriations. And in those appropriations, I would really prefer that your questions stick to questions about the appropriations, not about the spending levels and the governor's balanced budget proposal. There's going to be plenty of time to have discussions about that when we come out of this meeting, come out of this the pre-budget meetings, prior to going into the fiscal session, and again, even when we're in session, we'll have those discussions. But again, just to keep things rolling smoothly today, if you have questions about prioritization or spending levels, let's do that immediately after they present the governor's balanced budget, and then we'll move into the appropriations. It's fine to have questions for some of the leadership that's going to come down, but please try to keep that to appropriations. With that, you're welcome to present. If you could, just recognize yourself for the committee, and you're welcome to present.
Good morning. Jim Hudson, Secretary DFA.
Robert Breck, DFA.
Well, good morning again, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Jean, and members of the committee. I also want to pass along the greetings from our governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. As you know, she's departing soon on an important trade mission to Asia, looking to expand relationships with industries that have ties to Arkansas and to really kind of build new relationships with new industries as well, making the case that Arkansas is a place they ought to call home. The governor is our best salesperson for the state of Arkansas, and I know you're going to join me in wishing her success on her trip, praying for travel mercies, good health for her and for the entire delegation. I guess the downside of that means that I'm kind of a poor substitute for her today, so I'll do my best for you. The budget packet that you have gotten includes a cover letter from the governor. I want to cover some of the key points in her letter, then I'll let Robert step you through changes in the budget relative to FY24. The budget that's in front of you, actually, we began working on that several months ago last fall. Last fall, the governor kind of directed all the cabinet members to look at their budgets and to find opportunities to hold down the rate of growth. The governor feels strongly that 3% growth in the state budget year after year is not sustainable. And we have to look for ways to begin to bend the spending curve if we're going to secure our long-term fiscal health. The cabinet took that challenge on, which is why I'm happy to report that the governor's budget we are presenting today is first, it's balanced, fulfilling her constitutional obligation to do so. It includes only an increase of 1.76% over FY24 spending. As the governor notes in her letter, we are holding down spending while also still delivering on her priorities. In education, we're adding an additional $100 million in support of LEARNs, which is consistent with the projected increase included in the biennium budget that was adopted last year. This will enable us to continue to deliver on being a top 5 state for starting teacher salaries, funding education freedom accounts, and providing literacy coaches statewide. We are also providing UAPB an additional $2 million in funding, bringing the total state contribution to the land grant matching program to $5.8 million. The governor is also committed to meeting the funding needs of the state police so that all Arkansans can be safe in their homes and in their communities. That's why her FY25 budget adds $3.8 million for an additional trooper school to renew the ranks of the state police. In closing, the governor says it best herself in the last 2 sentences of her letter to you. She says, "I'm proud that this year's budget puts an end to government spiraling growth while still fulfilling the priorities Arkansans elected me to implement. I look forward to your consideration and to working together collaboratively to cut costs, improve services, and make Arkansas the best state in America to live, work, and raise a family." With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll have Robert walk you through some of the other changes in the budget, and then we'll be available to answer any questions the committee may have. Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The changes are really quite simple. We tried to keep things, the spending level. I think we met with all departments. Most of those are being kept at level spending. The same spending that they would have in 24, they'll have in 25, according to the governor's proposed budget. The main difference will be education. Obviously, education's the largest spender in the state budget. $100 million is dedicated toward education spending. That's consistent with what was agreed upon with the LEARNS Act. $34 million of that will be going to the public school fund to fund those items in the matrix and other items that they need to fund. Those were agreed upon. And then around $65 million or $64 million will go to the freedom accounts. That will bring the freedom accounts up to about $97 million each year, but that would be built into the budget. And by far, that's the largest amount. The entire increase in the state budget would be $109 million. $100 million of that would be education. Another $4 million actually would be tied to education, career and technical education. $4 million would be added to that because of utilization in those facilities. That doesn't leave a lot of room for everyone else. If you look at the state revenue balanced budget document that you've got, you'll notice the DHS administration goes up 4.3 million or 4.2 million. Some of that, or the bulk of that, is coming from a transfer from the Division of Workforce Services. You'll see that toward the bottom, negative 3.5 million. That's being transferred to DHS. Miscellaneous agencies, you'll notice that that's actually going down. That's mainly because of the election year issue. When there is a general election, they usually get more funding. I will say, and I'm thankful to tell many of you, that within that line, we are providing $730,000 for county fairs. I think that's always been a stumbling block for many of you. But this should take care of the county fair issue. We gave the Department of Agriculture whatever they said they needed, and $730 would make them whole, and that is built into the budget. Another item where there will be some growth is Division of Arkansas State Police. What state police have done, you agreed and you provided funding to have 2 additional troop schools. They typically have 1 troop school a year, but it was agreed upon that they would have 2 troop schools last year and then two troop schools this year. We've added $3.8 million into the budget to handle the expenses of the extra troop school. That's to make sure that they can get all the equipment that they need. Other than that, there aren't a lot of changes. So that's basically, those are the changes. Again, mainly it's education, getting the bulk of that funding, really $104 million if you count career tech. And that's basically it. I would take any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you. Senator Flowers, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you. I'm over here. The additional $2 million for University of Arkansas Pine Bluff for the land grant matching program. They actually needed a total of 7.4. And I want to know why we are not trying to meet the state match. Now, we had a discussion earlier last year, late last year, and I asked, and you suggested that some rules were changed with the feds in terms of matching, state matching. I asked you to show me those rules. I haven't seen any of those rules. And you suggested that the university could use any funds appropriated to them for the state match. I don't believe that's the case. Otherwise, it would defeat land grant. I want to know, why is it that we're not getting the additional $1.6 million that's needed for the state match? That's a good program down there. It benefits the whole state.
Well, the way we came up with that, according to UAPB and the people at higher ed, $3.8 million of their current budget was for the land grant. So there was $3.8 million moved to that line. We added $2 million to that line to make it 5.8. That is what their one-to-one match, that was their requirement this year. Now, I've heard two different numbers for next year, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing it the way we are. I've heard that the 1.6 million that they need may be over 2 years, maybe over 1 year. We still have $2 million set aside in a restricted reserve specifically for UAPB and the land grant. So what we can do is they'll get the 5.8 through the RSA. They can request whatever is needed out of restricted reserve to make up that deficit. Whether the $1.6 million increase is over 2 years or 1 year, I've heard both, so I'm not certain. But even if it's 1 year, we have that set aside in the restricted reserve. Then what we can do for the next budget is build that in, what we know their match will be, and we'll set aside money in a restricted reserve to ensure that they get 100% of their one-to-one match.
And we appreciate that. Thank you.
And absolutely want to make sure that that happens.
All right, thank you. Senator Payton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on the fair funding, does this allocate enough to make the fairs whole at their 2022 spent level, or something different, higher, lower, or what?
All I can tell you, Senator Payton, is I ask, how much do you need to make sure that they're made whole? There was already an allotment made for that purpose. We added $730,000 at the request of the Department of Agriculture. You may have to ask them for the specifics. But I'm told that that will cover the district fairs and any other shortfalls that they may have had. I can't tell you whether or not it would bring them up to a 22 level or even increase it, but that was the number we were given that they would need, and that's what we provided.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So even turn the clock back to session in last fall, I was talking to you guys about being too rosy on the forecast. I felt like they were unrealistic, and then here recently you cut back the forecast. What changed from just 4 or 5 months ago when I was asking and you thought everything was fine?
Well, Senator King, I think, what we shared last fall was that we would be revising the forecast consistent with what's required by statute. The revised forecast, makes adjustments for the tax cuts that were incorporated, that were passed last fall. So the amount of the forecast was not trimmed consistent with, actually it was trimmed a little less than what the projected cost of the tax cuts were. So there's nothing, reduced in the forecast, the revised forecast, really beyond the tax cuts.
Yeah, well, last fall it was just your forecast going way out in these years with this economy and everything, to me, is unrealistic. So, I'll go back and review the videos, but I think basically back then you guys were saying everything's going to be fine, but I'll go back and review the videos and we'll circle back.
Happy to do that, Senator.
Thank you. And one thing, just to remind committee members, we've talked about it a little bit in ALC. Maybe there's not exactly the same membership, but we made the tax cuts retroactive. And there are also, and that was both for the credits, the one-time credits, and also the major tax cuts themselves. DFA did not change the withholding tables to reflect that. And so there will be an increased amount of refunds given, and in addition to the new withholding tables. And so it's going to be kind of a double up for at least the first 3 to 4 months of this calendar year. So I think you'll see that. It's partially, I think, the reason y'all changed forecast. But I would not expect that to be the norm, in the future. This is truly a kind of a correction for not changing the withholding tables. Senator Letting, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Looking down the list here, there are, most of the changes are very minor, but I did notice the Division of Workforce Services, the new hire registry, is down almost 96% over last year. I've heard from a lot of constituents in Arkansans and elsewhere who are struggling to get their unemployment claims processed in time. I know the division's doing the best they can with the resources they have, but they're working under a considerable backlog. Can you explain a little bit, is this going to do anything to increase that backlog, or why is there such a significant drop with that particular line item?
That is the amount that was actually transferred to DHS in the line that you'll see up above. They were increased by that amount in DHS administration. That's that same amount of money. So that we didn't decrease any funding. And I can't tell you why somebody might be waiting for unemployment benefits, but that particular line item, it was reduced to give that to DHS with the TANF program, I believe.
Yes, Senator. The new hire registry is not related to the processing of unemployment claims.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Members, do we have any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you for your presentation this morning. We're going to move on to Section D, Institutions of Higher Education. We've got a overview by Commissioner Warden. If you could just recognize yourself for the committee, whoever's going to be making comments, and then you're welcome to proceed.
Ken Warden, Commissioner, Division of Higher Education.
Nick Fuller, Assistant Commissioner, Division of Higher Ed.
Chairman, members of the Assembly, it's our pleasure to be with you this morning to present an overview of the higher education budget. Nick Fuller, our CFO, will be presenting the details of the budget or the overview, and we also have members representing our institutions here this morning should you have more details that we don't have on hand. So thank you, appreciate your consideration.
Good morning. The first thing I would talk with you about is the state treasury, the funding recommendations that are made for the institutions. All of the funding recommendations are made off of a productivity funding model. As you know, I believe we're in year 7 of that model that we've been doing for multiple years. That distribution is in the budget manual that you have. I did provide a printout that's a little bigger for you as we walk through it if you want to be able to see it a little better. But I want to start with that, and this is what we base the initial treasury recommendations off of for the institutions. So based on the year 7 productivity model for overall for higher ed, we had a negative 0.14% increase. So really a 0.14% decrease in productivity for the year. This is the first year that has happened within the productivity model. And what that means is that with the negative productivity, we will not be asking for new funding for institutions for this coming fiscal year. Within the productivity policy, though, institutions will never ask for less funding overall. The difference in funds between what the institutions are able to keep on the recommendation and the prior year's funding level should be used for statewide purposes in the year that we are negative. And if you will see in the governor's proposed balanced budget, there is a line where we are recommending for that one-time incentive funds to be used. On the first page here, you'll see there is the funding for the institutions totals $584 million for productivity funding. and $4.5 million is the one-time incentive funds that we're requesting to be used for one-time purposes. And you will see, believe that's the last line of the balanced budget where that $4.5 million is recommended for funding of a sustainable building maintenance program, loan program for the institutions to provide some maintenance needs to the campuses. If you go on to the next page, we'll start walking through how the recommendations are made for funding to each of the campuses. The first 2 pages of the handout that's being brought to you are for the 4-year campuses. As you'll see, it begins with the current year RSA funding, then reductions for one-time funds. Institutions can only keep, if they had a prior year increase, they can only keep up to 2% above their prior year base into the new base for the upcoming year. Any other funds will be considered one-time incentive funds that get reduced for the next recommendation. So you will see the reduction of that incentive funds to create the fiscal year 25 base revenue stabilization before productivity is implemented. Then you will see in the blue columns on that chart, there are no recommendations for new funding. Again, that is due to the negative productivity. While we do not recommend new funds, there is a section where we reallocate funding from institutions that had negative productivity to the schools that did show productivity for the year. So on the second page in the red, you will see where those reductions were taken based off the percentages from each campus and reallocated to the institutions that were productive. For the 4-year institutions, there was only 1 that was productive. And then in the purple, you'll see as those go from the base and add the reallocation of funding to get the recommended funding level for fiscal 25 for the 4-year institutions. Then the next few pages are the 2-year campuses. In the first 2, I split them into 2 separate pages so that the additional institutions to make it a little easier to read. But the first 2 pages, again, are the breakdown to get to the base level funding, and then no new distributions. And then the last 2 pages show the reallocation, where there are 7 institutions that received new funding reallocated from those that had negatives. You'll see there are some 2-year institutions that have an asterisk next to them. Those are ones that have hit the threshold where they cannot lose more than 5% of their funding from the 5-year previous base level amount. So they have declined over the past 5 years enough where they've hit a bottom floor where they can't lose any more than 5% funding over 5 years. And that's why there's an asterisk next to those institutions. So that is how we develop the RSA recommendation. We then take the other state treasury funds that institutions might receive, Educational Excellence, Workforce 2000, combine those 3 together to make a full treasury appropriation level recommendation. In addition to those funds, we do recommend a 2% appropriation only increase to account for any fluctuations in educational excellence or workforce. So those will be reflected in the document that Henry presents to you later on the ups and downs of the appropriation levels. Are there any questions on productivity?
All right, thank you. Members, again, just a reminder, this is set on a formula that was approved by, higher institutions, and I think all this was fairly expected, at least from the conversations that I've had. Yes, Senator Chesterfield, you're recognized for a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that clarification. But I wax concerned because higher ed has been underfunded for years.
Yes, ma'am.
And now we're talking about taking away almost $1 million from UCA, over $500,000 for UALR, UAPB, almost $500,000. And yet we're saying that we ought to give some more to UA Fayetteville, which has traditionally had more money than anybody else.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't understand how this gets us to productivity. And I know that we have a formula and all of that. But we're talking about institutions losing large amounts of money. Allegedly, we're having increases in the number of students going to many of these institutions. How does that work out so that it reflects the increase in student population and yet a decrease in the amount of money that's going to the institution?
Yes, ma'am. So the model that we have is not based on enrollment.
obviously.
So the new enrollments aren't going to help until we get to them to a credential at the end of their time through the pipeline. But also, the years that we base this on are about 2 years behind where we are. So a lot of the issue with where we see the negative is the comparative years that we compare productivity. This year is the first year that we have a full year of the COVID impact in that comparative. So we had the big dip in students in the campuses in general in that comparative to the base.
Nick, this funding reflects 2 years ago?
The funding, Senator Sheffield, the funding is based on a 3-year rolling average. So that you mitigate any.
Remind me of the ingredients in determining productivity. Remind me of those. It's been a minute. So growth is not one of them?
Growth.
Growth is one of them, right?
The growth in the credentials that are being produced.
Growth and credentials produced, and
Yes,
what
ma'am.
else?
And then progression through their time in the system, whether they're getting to the second year, third year, fourth year.
So it's retention.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we have growth, we have retention.
Affordability.
Affordability.
Yes, ma'am. Trying to keep them on track, getting them graduated in, for a university graduating in 4 years, the associates getting them done in 2 years.
So this rolling 3-year thing.
Yes, ma'am.
As we look at the greatest pandemic we've had since 1918, that has caused all of this dip in funding going toward this year. What would you recommend to us, besides just saying we'll just go with the status quo, to help deal with this issue? Because we are talking about a 3-year rolling average that is predicated on something that has not happened in over 100 years.
Yes, ma'am.
Help me with that, please.
Sure. And I will say that, we have a funding work group comprised of presidents and chancellors and CFOs of the different campuses that meet and review these every year. And we had that group come together to look at the impact of this before we moved forward for that year, making the recommendation to see if there was something we should do differently. And we determined to go ahead with this year, and then we'll review again for the next data set to see if that is the only impact, if there's something else we should be doing different to not, if this is a one-time issue or if it's going to be an ongoing thing into the future.
And what did that collective genius come up with? Just maintain the status quo?
For this 1 year, for at least this year, to go ahead and move forward with the productivity model as it was, not put it on pause, not hold flat, just go roll with the model, and then we will review again this next year, which will be coming up in probably a month or two. We'll start looking at the data for the next year to see how that's going to impact the next year. Before we determine if we're going to continue that or not.
That is so interesting. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
I think, Senator, what it means is there needs to be work done to the model and the formula. I think we've acknowledged for a while now that there are some issues with it. I think the one good thing that does happen is the money isn't being lost for higher ed. It's getting shifted over to the maintenance funds that would be available to institutions. Again, I don't think it's the complete fix, but it's not going out of higher ed unless there's something I'm misunderstanding.
No, sir.
It's staying in higher ed. It's just going into a different bucket. But hopefully we will have some resolution to the higher ed funding formula before we come into the next session. You're recognized, Senator.
Thank you. So where I'm seeing the University of Central Arkansas losing $892, they're not really losing $892. It's being put in another bucket of money for them, or?
Yeah, it's being put into another bucket. I think it's on page 2. I can't remember now. I don't have it in front of me, but it's in the governor's balanced budget proposal. Is it? Sorry. Yeah, the sustainable building maintenance. That's where these things.
Page 12.
Yeah, they're all getting shifted to that. Is that correct? So it's not going in per se for UCA.
Now, for the amount that you're looking at, the 892 for UCA, that is being reallocated to Fayetteville within the model.
So UCA is losing money to UA Fayetteville.
For this year, yes, ma'am. Now, in another year, they may be gaining money from some of the other campuses. in
And
the
that's
model.
okay with UCA?
That has been the agreed upon model. For 7 years now, that's been the agreed upon model, that some of them will lose and will go to other institutions.
So
But we are looking at changes that may need to occur for the model before the upcoming regular session.
So the angst I was feeling originally is legitimate.
Yes, ma'am.
So
No, to your point of the money that's being reallocated, that's on the incentive fund column where, if you look, there's 3.8 million from Fayetteville this past year that's being taken from them, that's going to that maintenance fund for the next year. So Fayetteville is getting reduced by 3.8 million, and that's going to that maintenance fund to be distributed to other institutions or whoever needs them.
Whoever came up with this.
just to restate what Nick said early on, it was kind of busy when we were passing the handouts out and such. As a state, all of our public institutions collectively were less productive than they were last year. This is the first time that this has happened since we put the new formula in motion in 2017. So because we were less productive, there was less money assigned to the productivity total allocation. The money that was left over that was not reallocated to institutions because of the total lack of productivity, we're asking to be moved into a fund that was created last year in the session for critical maintenance. There is a fund there, that revolving loan fund, that institutions can access money to help them do critical maintenance on a rotational basis. And the money, but there was no funds in that fund. There was no money in it. So we're taking the leftover money of productivity and putting into that fund so our institutions can have some small amount of relief for some of these critical maintenance needs that's so important to them. Now, of the total productivity, there were those who were less productive and more productive. So those who are less productive are getting less money. Those who are more productive are taking some of those reduced funds and being allocated because they were more productive. And again, the formula itself is the one that we're given and the one that we are asked to work with. So we're doing the best with what we have to work with at this time. Is it perfect? No, ma'am. There's room for improvement, absolutely.
Well, let me ask you this. They are allowed to borrow money at what percentage rate?
I believe it is 0.02%.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
we're
not trying to make
we're
money
not
off of
gouging
them.
there.
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right.
We'll add on that the productivity. When we gauge productivity, each school is being gauged against themselves. They're not being compared to how they are on the other 4 years are doing. So UCA is being compared to how productive UCA was in those other 3 years to determine that plus or negative. So.
Well, let me just say publicly thank you to both of you, because every time I've called on you, you've been there. And I wanted to say that as we move forward. Higher ed has been very responsive to all institutions. I don't happen to like this formula very much, but I have appreciated you, Mr. Secretary, and I've appreciated you, Nick, and you young man over the years, and wanted to say that publicly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hammer, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What was the amount that's being put in the fund that's going to be available to the institutions, total dollar amount?
4.5 million.
Okay. And then my second question is this, and not to carry on a big, long discussion about the philosophy of the formula, but if affordability is one of the pillars in the formula, but yet we're not allowing these schools to have the money, and what I heard was because we're blaming it on COVID, unless I misunderstood, that's the primary reason, then are we adversely affecting them in this cycle by withholding the money, because that money could be used to help make their productivity better? Or could you just give me your feedback on that?
Senator Hammer, thank you for the question. So our institutions of higher education have experienced the same woes that all of the industry sectors have experienced over the last few years. I think one of our number one risk factors is attracting and retaining talent. And the funding that we have seen has not increased to the consumer price index, and we're having to compete with other markets where we're having to find talent and faculty members and do the hiring. So, no matter how we shift the formula, the pot of money is basically still the same. We haven't appreciated any funding. We are operating and using those funds because of the way the formula is currently designed and what we are prescribed to do. So taking that money and putting it into a critical maintenance fund where we know the need is there is one of the best things we can do with it, because we don't have the authority to roll it back in and try to figure out a redistribution to those based on their productivity. So again, we're trying to do the best with what we've got. And I think, with taking those funds and put them to an area of critical maintenance, which we know is in need across all our institutions, is about the best thing we can do with it.
Okay, and I remember the discussion about the critical maintenance last year, last cycle and everything, but so let me just ask you, is it the position that part of the productivity issues with the institutions is attributed to COVID? And if that is the position that's being taken, how much longer do you think that we're going to be able to use COVID as an excuse for that? Are we going to be able to roll out of it by the next general session where that will not be a statement that'll be used, or what's your opinion, please? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So generally speaking, we have seen some slight upticks in enrollment over the past year. So I hope that we're climbing out of this space. There's a national enrollment cliff based on birth rate that's hitting the 2025. I think that Arkansas is probably going to be less susceptible to some, cliff. I think that looks to be hitting more of the Northeast and maybe Midwest more than it's going to affect Arkansas. But just by pure birth rates, we're probably going to serve less moving forward. But right now, we seem to be coming out of COVID in a slow but steady rate. It's just that the 3-year rolling average, in my opinion, the 3-year rolling average is a good thing, because we didn't see a deep cut 2-3 years ago. We are mitigating that damage by making a slow roll of the 3-year rolling average to affect our institutions in a smaller way, in a longer way. And keep in mind, we have guardrails for our institutions. No matter how bad they did, they're not going to appreciate any more than a 2% decrease. And that's also in the formula. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you. Senator Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have kind of a big picture question. Just to start, over the last couple of decades, I think it's fair to say that the level of support from the state for public institutions of higher education has gone down relative to their overall budgets. Fair enough. And because of that, tuition has gone up significantly over that time span. And from my vantage point, I don't have any kids in college, and haven't over the last 2 decades. But from my vantage point, it's appeared as though the level of scholarships available and the amounts of the scholarships have remained relatively static. Is that also a fair assessment?
I would say that is fair. We submitted a recommendation to the legislative body last month, December, and the recommendation was that we revisit eligibility requirements and funding levels across all targets or opportunities for scholarships. So I think it's time to take a look at that. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and the point is, I know you get it, but the point is that a scholarship that you got 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, it doesn't get you as far in terms of your ability to go to school as it does today, because the scholarship's smaller relative to the cost of tuition.
That's right. And we have seen tuition hikes. And as I mentioned earlier, the higher ed funding, state portion of higher ed funding has not increased to keep up with, CPI and just inflation. And so we still have salaries and, faculty members and staff members that are trying to earn a living in this, inflationary environment. And so trying to keep those folks engaged and keep them whole and keep their salaries whole has been a challenge for us. So when we don't see growth rates in, public sources, we have to look at other opportunities to find ways to creatively keep our rates low for our citizens so that they have the opportunities to access education and remove that financial burden, but also those that we work with, trying to keep them employed and keep our talent coming to us so that we have the skill sets that we need to do our work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I think making sure that the scholarships keep pace with the cost of tuition is an important priority, and I'm glad to hear that it's on your mind and that you're going to come up with a plan to address it or to study it, and I look forward to hearing where that goes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Payton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't trust my memory as much as I used to. Going back a few years when this productivity funding was created, if I remember right, that was new money. It was an increase to higher ed budget at that point. Whatever was in this bucket that was being created, along with the model that determined how it would be distributed, that was all new money, wasn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, and each year prior to this year, we have had a portion of new money added based on the productivity that we've had. So over the 6 years, we've had about $35 to $40 million in new funds added to higher education as a whole.
And if
Where
I
in
remember, the argument at that point was that higher ed had not had an increase in many years.
Yes, sir.
And so they agreed to this productivity model because it gave them an opportunity at new funding and increase in funding.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I'd add that was largely created by higher ed institutions. I mean, this wasn't the dream work of the legislative body. The formula was created by higher ed, and it has served them with some increases over the years, but productivity is down across the board, and that's why you're seeing the negative. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I understand because of the productivity funding that the money has to be moved to the maintenance. I think my question is, I'm looking at Henderson, which is what, 382, right, that they're going to probably lose. Is there going to be, are we anticipating layoffs at some of these colleges? And I think Henderson stood out because of the financial situation they've been in for the past couple of years. That's probably going to be a lot of money to their smaller budget. So are we anticipating layoffs at not just Henderson, at some of these other schools? And the shortage of the budget this year for these institutions, will that be passed on to the students as far as increased fees or tuition? Like, what is this really, what impact is this really going to have to these colleges and the kids who are attending these schools?
I will say that I think there are folks here with the ASU system that can probably speak particularly to Henderson, but I just think that if we look at lower productivity, theoretically, that you're going to need less folks to deliver coursework and so on. So we would hope that we would look for ways, if there is right sizing due to downturns in enrollment, that's done through attrition and other things rather than having to lay off, individuals. So I know our chancellors are in the room and we could probably speak to that. Each campus is responsible for handling those things internally, based on their assets at their campus and their needs. So, we anticipate, I would think that theoretically you would see some lower numbers of employment, but how each campus deals with that is really based on the campus and its administration and what they have, who they have to serve and how they're going to serve those.
Okay, so nobody's had any kind of conversations with you that they might be anticipating layoffs because of this, what we're about to do?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
And as they get to the budgeting process for the year, it'll be on an individual basis by institution on how each of them handle that. But we have not heard anything of that nature of
Okay.
layoffs so far.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Stubblefield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken, can you give me just a real simple definition of productivity?
No, sir. But I will try to do my best. It is by design fairly complex because it is a complex issue.
I can't wait just a minute.
Basically, the number of degrees you produce, you are funded based on the number of degrees and certificates you produce. Each certificate and degree has a point value that goes into a formula. Also in that formula, there are things accounted for, and you get multipliers based on if you're delivering high demand STEM degrees, if you're serving underserved populations. There's a few other factors that go into that. If you're doing research, if you're a 4-year, there's a multiplier for that. It is a complex formula, but the simplest definition I could use is that those who produce more certificates and degrees get a higher value in the formula, and that value rolls into a funding based on themselves. So they compared against themselves on the 3-year rolling average. If they produce more than they produced in the 3 years prior, they're going to see an uptick and an opportunity to capture more of the funding formula. If they see a downtrend in how many degrees and certificates they produce, they get money taken away, and that's reallocated to those who were more productive. I hope that makes sense.
Well, the question I have is, how does that play into the fact that 52% of the students who graduate from college are working at jobs 10 years later that are unrelated to the major they took while they were in college?
So, can you re-ask that? How does it relate to those employed in fields for which they didn't study?
Exactly.
A lot of our degrees have very transferable skills. And this is the educator coming in, educator and me coming out. And while we don't, I'll use liberal arts, okay? That's one that catches a lot of attention. We don't have standard occupation codes for those that are being, necessarily graduating from with a history degree or a social science degree. But we knew there are a lot of transferable skills in those degrees. So for drawing a straight line from the degree they graduated with to the industry sector which they're employed is very difficult to do unless for instance, it's an engineering degree that is an occupation code. Those degrees that don't have standard occupation codes are hard to tie back to the degree. And your point is taken about 52% not being in the field they studied. But transferable skills are a key thing in higher education at whatever level, whether you're at the certificate level, associate degree level, a bachelor's degree level. The things you learn that make you more employable across industry sectors are oftentimes as or more important than the specificity of the degree that you're actually studying in. And I hope that makes sense, Senator. I don't have a clear, just prescribed answer for that.
It's just that we know there's I've looked at a lot of studies, and we know there's an overabundance of business degrees among students who are not able to find jobs once they get out, even social science degrees. And I just wonder how the higher ed, how they're addressing those. If they continue to push those students through knowing that they're going to have a hard time finding a job once they get out of college?
So I think that from my perspective is what we have to do is help our students, and we're doing this daily in K-12, the connectivity from K-12 into higher ed, is let the students better understand the value proposition of the degree and where they might earn the credentials and earn the standard of living that they want to choose and the opportunities that are there for them, and let them self-select into where they want to go and what they want to do. And I think that's a cultural thing in Arkansas that's generational that we still cannot do enough work to narrow that gap on having students understand the value of the opportunities and let them self-select on where they want to distinguish themselves, whether that's an automotive technician or a PhD in physics. I think that's key to what we're doing. And again, backing into, I don't think that at our institutions necessarily stand-up degrees because they don't think there's jobs at the end of those. I think there are a lot of transferable skill sets, again, that come out of these degrees that are of value.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to the loan fund that we were discussing a minute ago, and I understand this is the first time that money's been put in there. And staff had actually pulled me the statute, so I was reading through this so I could somewhat remember it. But I guess my thing is that at this point, and I guess we can do this later too, but I'd go ahead and like to start getting this established, that each one of those requests are also going to have to come before the legislature. So it's my understanding there's not an appropriation for this fund, of course, since it's been the first time. So I know there will have to be a governor's letter as it relates to that specific one. But what I would hope, and I know that would come through DF&A, is that each one of those requests come to us separately. So if one of the colleges wants, and I see the minimum has to be 100,000 or more, if it needs to be 101,000 for a certain college, that we just get a governor's letter for that so that we would know what each specific one was. And I actually think that's probably the appropriate way because I know the legislature is supposed to be involved in specifics in appropriations. So is that y'all's plan to do it that way, or did you have some other other view that you were going to try to come in and just get the whole 4 million or whatever it was in one fell swoop?
Our initial plan was to have a governor's letter to get that appropriation into DHE's Appropriation Act for the program. But we are still working to develop the rules so we can add some stipulation to have a review through here. There's also the review of the Higher Education Coordinating Board before any loan is approved as well. But we can add the report to you as well prior to any approval.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the statute here, and again, from my standpoint, I think that the legislature is going to have to. I think it's appropriate that they're included on each one of those requests, because just to be blunt, what I don't want to happen is for not that it would down here, but one member come in and say, well, I want this $4 million from my college. None of the other members here know what's going on, and that's somehow given as a loan. And I want to make sure. I know somebody else asked you about the rate. You said the rate was 0.02%.
0.2, I believe, is what we have set in the rule that we're working on right now.
0.2%?
Yes, sir.
Or are you just saying 2%?
No, 0.2%.
We're
not expecting.
So 0.002 is going to be the rate on that thing, which is basically
nothing.
Nothing, and that's my point. This could be construed as basically just funding for an institution. It's really not a loan, and I understand they'd be paying back basically just principal, but I do believe that all of that needs to come through the legislature on an individual basis. And Mr. Chair, I don't know if we could have staff to work on that, because again, I understand this is the first time that this has happened, but I think it's critical that it does come before peer on each one.
Yeah, we can flag it, but I also think we need to see what the rules say. Because a lot of the concerns may be negated by the way the rules are written. If it's an allocation based on merit and need and everything else, it's a formula.
Yes, sir.
And not arbitrary, then I'm not sure where we would step in and then make it arbitrary. We would have the ability to do that if we were taking a sound formula that was allocating money for projects that was based on true numbers, and then we came back and said, no, arbitrarily, we don't think A, B, C, D, and E should be the first in line. So I'd want to see the rules before, even, I guess I personally would want to weigh in on what our involvement should look like.
Sure, but we haven't provided any appropriation. We're going to have to provide appropriation for the entire amount at one time, or we're going to have to do it as those requests come in, and I just feel like it's more prudent and transparent if we do each one individually. That's all I'm asking.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to see the rules first, and we can work from there.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
All right. Representative Wooten, you better not be Senator. I think that hurt me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, this might have already been asked, but I need to clarification. Of the positions that are over 2 years vacant, how many of those are budgeted? Do you know?
I don't have the number on that. Now, I will remember on the institutions, their positions, any of their positions, the budgeted ones and unbudgeted the unbudgeted ones don't count toward their insurance. They only pay per the filled positions. It's not similar to the way state agencies have. If they have a budgeted vacant position, they still pay insurance. Institutions do not have that. Okay. As well as the state funding for institutions, none of that is allocated directly for positions or salaries. So if they have increases in position counts or anything, they don't request additional state funding. All of their funding is solely based on that productivity formula. So any position changes aren't related to state funding requests.
Okay. In your letter,
yes, sir,
that you forwarded to the chairman of the committee, you stated that it was 27 new positions?
Yes, sir.
Total. Okay. Of those 27, how much will your appropriation increase any for those new positions? In other words,
it will not, and I believe that's the next agenda item. We haven't gotten to that item yet on the agenda.
So,
but the appropriation level itself will not increase or decrease based on those position changes.
One more question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. On your interest that you earn, is it shown anywhere in your budget?
interest on.
Interest that any institution, how do they handle that?
It is not shown within the budget levels rather than in their cash funding.
Okay. Do you know how much interest income the institutions earn on money that they have deposited?
Not on me now. I don't. I would have to gather that information for
Do
you.
they report that to you, or do they?
No, sir.
That's handled by each institution.
Each institution collects that. Yes, sir.
Do they show it anywhere on any of their financial reports?
Yes, I do believe they show that on their yearly financial reports. How much?
Okay.
All right, thank you, Senator Flowers.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to know what does Department of Higher Ed have already for facilities and maintenance without the use of the loan program that's coming into being?
For maintenance on facilities, we have nothing dedicated to that from the department level. There is no state funding dedicated to maintenance of facilities on the higher ed campuses.
And for critical maintenance, how much has been recommended for critical maintenance for higher ed?
So during the biennium, the recommendation for deferred maintenance was around $3 billion, with almost $300 million of that being defined as critical maintenance on campuses. So we're looking at around $300 million in critical maintenance needs, with no ongoing dedicated funding for that from the state.
And that would not be subject to a request for a loan by the institution?
They could, if for any of those needs as they rise to those levels, to request a loan from this fund. But up until this point, there hasn't been any money in that fund to be able to disperse funds to anyone. This would be the first time that funds would be allocated to it.
And what's being allocated to that critical maintenance fund?
It's $4.5 million.
4.5, and that would not be for loan purposes?
Yes, that would be a loan. Yes, ma'am. We don't have any funding being dedicated directly to critical maintenance projects. That would not be a loan.
There's nothing carried over?
No, ma'am. The only other funding source on the state level that institutions can request from would be to request a release from like the restricted reserve fund for certain projects as they rise to the occasion that would come to you all for releases on a one-time basis. That's the only other pot of state funding that's available.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to say that it's hard to hear some of the colleagues' questions. I don't know whether the mic needs to have the volume turned up or what, but it's kind of hard to hear over here.
Members, when you're using your mic, just please lean into the mic a little bit so that you're able to be heard. And my question would be on this formula. I mean, I think you've already it's been communicated enough. There's concern wanting to know what that looks like before maybe the governor's letter would be approved for the 4.5. Do we believe that's something that we can at least have some drafts on prior to us going into the session? All right, yes. Thank you very much. All right, Senator Hammer, you'll recognize. Before I do that, Representative Wooten, I was leaned over, and Kevin had bothered me and was pestering me, and so I may have cut you off on accident. So I was gonna. Kevin was, and I was asking Kevin a question. I think I may have cut you off. Did you have some other questions, or are you good? You're good. Okay. All right, Senator Hammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I want to direct this to you first before I ask. As far as asking individual questions of the individual higher ed institutions, are we going to cover that under E?
Yes, we will.
Okay. Well, the question I'm going to ask.
Well, actually, F. There's two letters from higher ed in E1 and 2. And now if you have a question, I guess, specific, for instance, on the authorized positions for institution, you can ask that there on E1. And then E2, I believe, is just for UAPB. So, but then we'll get to all the institutions in F.
All right. Let me ask the question, and then you defer me if you want to. The question I'm going to have is, with some of the institutions not receiving as much money, my question is going to be for Shane and for HS Henderson State. and refresh my memory, I think there's still an outstanding balance on a loan that we made to Henderson State, correct? So what I'd like to hear testimony about is, with them not receiving as much money this cycle, how's that going to affect their ability to repay, and what's the outstanding balance on that loan? So, Mr. Chair, whenever you want to allow that question to be asked and have them come, I'll defer, but I'd like to ask it when the time's up, please.
Okay. Let's wait until we get to F, and you'll be the first in the queue.
Okay, thank you.
All right, members, we have any other questions on the presentation? All right, seeing none, we'll move to E1.
Yes, sir. Item E1 is a request for changes for personnel for positions that are authorized in each of the Institution Appropriation Acts. Currently, institutions are authorized 38,996 positions. The requested changes in this letter reflect a net increase. I believe it is actually 26. There may be a typo on this letter. Maybe 26 positions changed. I will add in those changes the first request for ASU Jonesboro, the 10 position increase. The 10 were from central growth pool positions that have been improved in the interim during the personnel committee changes. So aside from that is really an increase of 16 positions.
So we've already approved those 10 positions.
Yes,
this
sir.
is allowing
Yes.
those to continue on and putting them in their,
Yes, and there are only two others that are requesting increases. It is Arkansas Tech University. They're requesting an increase of 18 positions for their new non-formula entity, the Arkansas Tech Institute. And then University of Arkansas at Fayetteville is requesting a total increase of 30 positions, with the majority of those being graduate assistant positions due to their increased enrollment on campus.
and those tech positions would not be funded by the state.
Correct.
Okay. So how many was that?
18
Okay.
for Arkansas Tech.
All right.
And the others are either decreases or no increase, just changes between positions with no increase whatsoever on the other campuses.
All right, thank you. So members, what we have is a letter, and just to kind of, we'll take questions on this in just a second, but if we adopt this letter that allows it to be incorporated, and then what we would want to do is flag this and send it to personnel when we go into fiscal. That way there's full debate on any changes that may need to be made or whatever. But again, all we're doing, in this whole process is allowing some bills to be drafted that does not end the debate on the bills or what may happen. With that, I'm going to turn it over Senator Sullivan for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you know if any of these positions are delegated to DEI at higher ed? We've had quite a few meetings with them. Do you know the answer to that?
No, sir, I do not believe that any of them are dedicated to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right. With that, I need a motion to adopt E1. I've got a motion to adopt. I've got a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, motion carries. E2, and this is, I'll let you go ahead.
Sir. Item E2 is a request for a new appropriation section for University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. This will be an individual standalone treasury appropriation for the state match for their 1890 land grant expenses. Just to allow, additional transparency to see where those expenses are coming from. Currently, all of the expenses are rolled into their regular state treasury appropriation. So we wanted to request an individual appropriation. As you'll see, we asked for the full $7.4 million in the event that the federal allocation reaches that level, that we have that authority in the Appropriation Act.
All right, thank you. Members, do we have any questions on E2? What's the will of the committee? We've got a motion to adopt. We've got a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, motion carries. That's going to take us to F. All right, Mr. Rice, you're welcome to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Henry Rice, Bureau of Legislative Research. So if you'll please look at a document titled Summary of Institutions of Higher Education, which should be item F on your desk. It's a summary of appropriations that we hope will assist you in your decision making today. You'll be looking at and making a decision on the appropriations for Treasury, cash, and other appropriations that are in the binder. There are 3 parts to the summary. The first part you will see is, that's on the first page, that's for Treasury appropriations, which are paid from the Revenue Stabilization Fund, that's General Revenue, Educational Excellence, and Workforce 2000 funds. So if you read from left to right in the columns, it shows the institutions or the fund, shows the pages that the appropriation appears on in the manuals, and then the authorized appropriations that they currently have for this fiscal year. And then the AHEC-B recommendation, that's the Arkansas Higher Education Coordinating Board recommendations for fiscal year 2025, which is next fiscal year. Then the following columns show the change in dollar amount for the next fiscal year, as well as the percent change from the current authorized appropriation levels. The far right column has asterisks in it, and one asterisk will show line item changes. 2 asterisks will show either an addition or deletion of a line item, and 3 asterisks will indicate the deletion or addition of a new appropriation section. And if you look at the bottom of the first page, you will see the total for the 4-year institutions. On the second page of your handout, you will see the total for the 2-year institutions in the same format, and these are still the Treasury Fund appropriation summaries. On the third page is the beginning of the cash appropriation summaries. Now, these are the ones that are paid from tuition and fees, sales, and federal funds. It is also in the same format. And on the last page, we have what we call other appropriations on the handout. It includes tobacco funding, special revenues from court filings that go to the University of Arkansas and UALR law schools, and breast cancer research funds, among others. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have on this summary.
All right, well done. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Senator Hammer. He had a quick question, I think, on maybe what some of these cuts mean for Henderson. All right, Senator Hammer, you're recognized. Repeat your question, and then whoever needs to answer, just recognize yourself at the time.
Morning. Thank you. Just the question is, with the formula showing cuts to Henderson, and if I remember right, there's still an outstanding loan balance that you borrowed. So can you just give us an update on the balance, the intent, and with those cuts, how you plan on being able to make the payment and make the adjustments in other areas?
Thank you, Senator Hammer, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. I'm going to introduce our new chancellor of Henderson State University. Some of you might recognize him from another part of the state. Chancellor Dr. Trey Berry, who arrived on campus 3 months ago now. We're very fortunate to have him, and I'll let him kind of speak to the question, and I also have some additional information I'll share with the committee about what's been going on since 2019 with the ASU system when we came in to assist Henderson. This is Roger Moore, our CFO, and so we'll be glad to answer any other questions you might have. Chancellor.
So yes, sir, we paid on that loan about $250,000. We understand our obligation, and we're working hard to meet that obligation. You need to know that. To answer your question, will it make it more difficult? On accounting part, yes, sir. It will make it more difficult. But we're doing our part to do conservative budgeting. We're just about to start our budgeting cycle right now. We feel good about our budgeting where we are right now. And so we're going to continue to find ways where we meet that obligation, sir.
Okay. Mr. Chair, would you refresh my memory as to that was a $10 million loan, if I remember right? Where did that? $6
million.
$6 million, sorry. Interest, inflation went up there. Can you
Please no.
Please no.
No.
Please no.
So where did that money originate from? That's what I'm trying to remember. And how is it going to go back into the higher ed institutions, or was that out of general revenue? I'm just trying to remember.
That's a budget stabilization trust fund. So it goes back to the trust fund, Senator Hammer.
Okay.
That's the fund that DFNA makes loans from every month to different agencies and entities.
Okay. All right.
I will mention for the committee's information, when we became involved in Henderson in 2019, obviously I've said many times, the easiest thing would have been to close the doors and give you the keys. There has been a lot of hard work by a lot of people. The staff at Henderson State University took a cut to their salaries. They took a cut to their retirement, and none of them have had a raise since then. And to anyone who is still working on that campus,
who was there when all this started, they have my greatest admiration, because the easiest thing would have been for them to go somewhere else, but they stuck it out. But in terms of changes that have been made, you've all obviously know some of the cuts that we had to make, but just kind of put it in perspective. The personnel services alone at Henderson in 2019 was $34.6 million. In 2023, we have reduced that down to $20.5 million. Obviously, there are a lot of sacrifice. A lot of people lost their positions. And what I stated about salaries and retirement, they'll never get back. But the difficult decisions that needed to be made have been made, and we have a lot of work still left to do. What I would tell you with Chancellor Berry, he is a recruiting machine, and has already been through every high school and area, and that's really how we're going to get out of this. You're not going to have money to get us out of it. We're going to have to recruit our way out of it. You've heard coaches kind of say that before. We're going to have to recruit our way out of it and also be very mindful of our physical stature and find ways to keep reducing cost, but also look at our whole footprint and see if there are other ways that we can maybe find some dollars to help pay back. But we will meet our obligation. We do ask for your flexibility and understanding as we continue down this path.
Well, and I want to commend you because Jonesboro ASU has come in and righted the ship and put it back in the right direction. So I do want to commend you for that. I just wanted to know that as far as the connection between the formula reduction and your ability to make the obligation that you currently have, what your plans were. But I do want to commend you for that. And Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I have a question for U of A, please. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And on this, so is your question for Henderson ASU? It is. Okay. Senator, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just with regards to the loan, you pay back $250,000. If I recall, that was in one lump sum, but that was like 3-4 years ago.
Correct.
You haven't made any payments since then.
Correct.
How long is it supposed to be paid back? I want to say 2028 was what stuck in my brain, but I can't remember how long a period of time it was supposed to be.
Sir. The payments begin, I think, this December, and will be paid out. I think it's around $800,000 per year until it's paid off. About $900,000 until it's paid off.
Okay, and there's no interest on that. It's just
correct.
Okay,
that's the way. I will say that's the way the Budget Stabilization Trust Fund has always been. There's nothing new there. Right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator Chesterfield. Is your question for Henderson? All right.
So much, and thank you all for the work that you're doing. It's going to be interesting seeing you at Henderson rather than where I'm accustomed to seeing you, but good luck to you because I am vested in hoping that this institution continues to thrive. Could you tell me if this is going to entail an increase in student fees? These cuts, is that how we're going to make up the cuts? How are we going to do that?
We anticipate that we will increase this year. We have not increased over the past 2 years, and that was on purpose for our students' sake and recruiting. But we do know that we're going to need to make up some ground that we have lost. We know that, as we've already pointed out, with the loss of productivity funding, we've got to make up that ground as well. But we will try to be as prudent as we can. I will tell you also, Senator, that this year we were chosen as the most affordable university in the state of Arkansas. We are proud of that distinction, and we are going to continue, even if we have to raise fees, that we will hold that distinction in the years to come as well, because that's very important to us.
It is, especially in that part of the state. Are there any 2-year programs that you have that would make your students eligible for the Our Futures grant, which I think is being underutilized? I'm a big proponent of it. Any of those programs?
No, ma'am, not at this moment.
All right,
we have partnerships with our 2 years, like ASU Three Rivers, that do offer those for Our Futures, but not Henderson does not have any of those type programs.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right,
currently.
Thank you, Representative Wooten.
I also want to commend y'all for what you've been through down there and for the endurance that y'all have shown. particularly the students and the employees. In your review and looking at changes that needed to be made, has anyone looked at the for lack of a better word, the prosecution of those involved? I mean,
all of that was explored. Representative Wooten, the legislative audit was sent, my understanding was sent to the prosecuting attorney. But I think I would say I'm no expert. My system CFO, Julie Bates, is here as well, and I want to commend her and her team for all they've done for Henderson. But to your question, there was nothing illegal that was done. I would just call it poor management, I guess, is the best word I can use that I can say in public as to what happened. We've looked under every leaf trying to make sure there was not something done illegally. It was just very poor management. Basically, scholarshiping too many students too much you didn't have enough people paying the bills, and it caught up to them. That really caused the beginning of the problem, and giving raises when they didn't need to. And it all snowballed. And once it started snowballing, there was no way to stop it.
Okay. What about the board? Is it the same? Is it an advisory board now?
It's make sure I've got this right. None of the board members that were on the board at Henderson State are still on there. We do have a board of visitors. We put 2 positions on the ASU system board when Henderson became a part of the ASU system. We have 2 positions that represent Henderson. They are not former board members. And I will say for them, I don't think in a lot of ways they were provided the proper information in a timely fashion, because I know all of them individually. They all love Henderson State University. So I think some of that, again, was poor management of not providing the board. It's something we take great pride in at the ASU system office, is providing our board their timely information, the information they need to make decisions. I don't think that was done by previous administrations at Henderson that led to that. But certainly none of them are currently on the board of visitors or a member of the trustees.
So Jonesboro, y'all have been, Little Rock, the administration has been deeply involved
every day
in the result of what's happening and what's being done down there.
Sir. Yeah, and really what I tell, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Representative Wooten, what I really say to people who ask me kind of what is it, what's the system's function is, you're kind of the back office, a second set of eyes to make sure whatever Roger's got, we're looking at saying, okay, this is good, or maybe we need to go this direction. And that's really the benefit that we provide, is kind of that, I wouldn't call it oversight directly, but really more partnership of collaboration that we provide with Julie and her staff.
I think what concerns us in the body of the legislature is the fact of the fiduciary responsibilities that were they just didn't find it, didn't look at it. What were they using techniques or accounting situations that they just flat out falsified it?
Nothing was falsified, to my knowledge. I'm looking back to her if she would use that term. And to the legislature's credit, you came back once we went through this process. Y'all came back and I think addressed this problem going forward. One of the biggest challenges was what we would call days cash on hand. They were down to 10, maybe 7. Julie's standing up back there. They were down to 7 days cash on hand. So you guys last session came back with a bill that requires that reporting to the board, and I believe that report goes to the General Assembly as well, and the ADHE as well, to try, because that's the biggest indicator. Julie will tell you, and I can get her up here if you need to. That's the biggest indicator of whether or not you're in a healthy financial state, and that's if they had known that, like we will be able to know now, you'll be able to tell if somebody is in trouble. Now, some of that's is going to fluctuate if you've got a construction project going on, huge construction, that's going to change your days cash on hand. But if it's over a period of time, then yes, there is reason to be concerned. But y'all, to your credit, you have addressed that, I believe, going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for answering some questions. Senator Hammer, you got a question for the U of A? I don't think Shane will want to answer.
I can from my colleagues if they want me to. Randy, you want me?
Oh. So a question on UAMS. Looking at you. Yes, sir. Come on, Mr. Vice Chancellor. We didn't need the rest of you to come. We could have just had Andy, I think.
I think last year we got to answer a question for the U of A, so.
All right. Senator Hammer, go ahead and ask your question, then just whoever needs to can recognize themselves to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I'm reading the numbers right, there's is it a $60 million additional request, or it's on the University of Arkansas Medical Science, 60 million. Am I reading that right? And can you give me some idea of why the 60 million?
Yes, my name is Amanda George. I'm the CFO for UAMS. That's in our cash appropriations. We have been growing over the last several years, and we're requesting about a 2.4% increase in our cash appropriations for next year with the opening of some of our new facilities on the campus.
Okay. And will any of that assist you? Are you operating at full capacity? We've had a lot of discussions about the nursing shortage. We've given facilities additional funding. Are you operating at full capacity now as far as your rooms, or do you have vacant floors?
We are still working on improving our capacity. It has improved, but we still have action plans around continuing improvement into the next year.
So as far as asking for 60 million, and yet your facility is not operating at full capacity because of staffing issues, if I understood what you said right, why is there not more emphasis on the staffing issues to take care of the room that you have versus continuing to advance when you can't keep full what you have? Unless I missed something. If I did, please educate me.
The additional appropriations will allow for that growth. We plan to move to full capacity, and if we didn't have the additional appropriations there, we wouldn't continue to be able to grow.
Okay, because my understanding is that they're at full capacity creates more capabilities for more surgeries, more billing, and all kind of a trickle-down effect. So that's what I've always wondered is if we keep adding on, but we're not taking care of what we got or filling up what we have in order to produce more surgeries, more services that would allow more billing, that would create greater revenue. So
yes, correct. The additional growth drives more margin to our bottom line that will help us financially.
Okay, and then the last question is the Pan and Pandas. It's 175. It's been appropriated, but there's no funding directed to it. But the appropriation is remaining in place in the event that money does come available to give to that clinic. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Senator Chesterfield. Is this on UAMS? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to you all. Tell me about the $30 million deficit that we had been hearing so much about.
Well, I'm happy to report that it's not $30 million anymore.
And what is it then?
It is positive $12 million.
Wonderful, yeah.
I will put an asterisk by that. We
don't burst my bubble.
Okay, I won't then. We have done a lot of work to improve our financial situation.
Wait a minute, let me get my head back around. Okay.
Sorry.
Because I was just so ecstatic that my brain stopped working. Okay, Ms. Asterisk, what happened?
Well, I just want to be fully transparent. We have put a lot of work into turning around our financial performance and have put several initiatives in place that are starting to have an impact on our bottom line. You may have seen in the newspaper that UAMS got a $30 million lump sum payment for a 340B repayment that we received in January, and that is what turned our financial situation to the positive. But we are projecting to maintain financial stability in the coming months. So we needed that boost to cover the year-to-date loss, and it has flipped us positive, and we intend to hold steady.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Johnson, your question for UAMS. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On handout E1 on page 5, I was just trying to go down, and then when the numbers jump out, I kind of need an explanation. You had a reduction of 364 positions in housekeeper down to 25. And when I see that, I presume, and actually Senator Petty and I just discussed it, he says, well, that's got to be outsourcing. And outsourcing is not necessarily a net reduction in spending. I'm just trying to see, is there definitive savings realized, or are we just making these state employees private employees?
It was a net neutral for us, but it was improved service levels. We had a lot of turnover in that group, and we evaluated internally if we would be able to improve the service to our employees and our patients, really, by outsourcing the service so that it was more stable, and the cost was actually about net neutral.
Okay, and that's good news. All right, that answers it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Kavanaugh, your question for UAMS. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is going, if you don't mind, gather me some information up. So I notice a lot of times we will have agencies that come in and they have an employee that is actually leased from UAMS. We did it with, I think, the Secretary of Health, and we've done it for other positions. And through that process, I've noticed a lot of times that we appropriate you the salary, but we also appropriate that full salary again to the other agency. So what I would like to know is all employees that you have leased, or their part of their salary is being covered by another state agency, and what your appropriation is for that. And then I'm going to have to find out what that agency's appropriation is for their salary also, if you can provide me with that information.
We'll get that for you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Senator Hammer, is this related to UAMS? Okay, you're recognized.
Thank you. And just briefly, the environment at UAMS, and as far as retainage of physicians, the physician level, not anyone underneath that, what is your retainage experience as far as holding your physicians throughout the system?
So my name is Michelle Wiles. I'm the Chief People and Culture Officer.
Would you mind pulling that mic a little closer, please, ma'am?
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
So I'll repeat myself. My name is Michelle Wiles. I'm the Chief People and Culture Officer. I don't have what we typically call a turnover number specific to physicians, but that is data we can get for you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last thing over the drilling.
I can get the data for you. I don't have it specific to physicians, but we can pull that data and provide it to you.
Okay, and I would appreciate that. The $60 million that you're asking also, is that going to be for the purpose of additional salaries or additional positions outside of those that provide direct medical services, such as, are you going to expand, like, for example, your DEI department or any other departments that are actually non-medical?
No, it's for the medical side.
Strictly for the medical. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Wooten.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're the U of A campus or UAMS?
UAMS.
UAMS, okay. Why would y'all have, can you explain why you would have 9,338 administrative positions and 2,636 academic positions?
Sorry, I'm Stephanie Gardner. I'm the Provost and Chief Strategy Officer at UAMS. So I think your question was, why do you have 6,200 academic positions and why do you have 2,000 administrative?
Yeah, why would you have almost 7,000 positions that are academic, and then you have 9,338 positions that are administrative?
I don't know if those numbers, I don't know the numbers of how many we have of each type, but I can tell you that from faculty, all of our physicians have academic titles. So even though they're clinicians, they're also academicians. So some of these people are going to be classified on the academic side. Is that what you're asking? If they're
why would the higher ed department show us 2,636 academic teaching? I would assume that's teaching positions.
Right.
And then 9,338 positions that are considered administration.
Well, I think you're looking at all the staff for the hospital as well as for the campus. So we're both, all of those positions are lumped in that run the hospital and also that handle the academics of all of our colleges. So the administration for the entire campus is lumped into those numbers.
Well, this says UAMS. Is that y'all?
You want to respond?
So I'm happy to try and address that. So on our campus of UAMS, we actually have 3 business lines. One, as you're aware of, is our colleges, and we call that our universities. So what we would put in academic are those people who are really working inside of our colleges. But then our other 2 business lines are what we call our clinical enterprise and our research group. And we have a lot of people who do research work on campus. And all of them are falling into that administrative category. So I think that's what you're looking at as, you know, while it might say administration, they do a lot of other things that are not just typical, like my nurses are in there, and even people who are totally dedicated to our research lines. And the academic is really referring to those people employed by our colleges doing that education.
And teach. Well, can you give us a breakdown of those that are involved in research?
So would you like us? We can give you a breakdown for those 3 business lines and where they fall.
What I'd like to know is of the 9,300 positions that are listed as administration, how many of those are involved in research that would be considered academic? I mean, I don't understand.
Right. Yeah, we can certainly break that down, but I have lots of people involved in research. One job classification easily to talk about is like, we have people who are just doing the research writing and the grants writing and things like that related to research. So we can certainly break that administration down a little clearer for you.
Well, you're not the only one. University of Fayetteville, U of A at Fayetteville has 2,936 administrative positions and 2,593 academic. So, I mean, there needs to be a better clarification, I guess.
We'll get you a breakdown of all the position types that are in that category.
Okay.
No problem.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Representative Springer.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to know, does this budget include the campuses that you have here in Little Rock on Colonel Glenn and in North Little Rock as well? Is it those offices as well?
Yeah, it's all of the UAMS.
It's all of the UAMS facilities across the state?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. With that, we need to adopt or look to adopt the AHEC-B recommendation. Do I have a motion? I've got a motion. I've got a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, motion carries. It's going to bring us to Section G. We're going to take these, we'll have, I guess, an overall presentation if I'm looking at it correctly, and then we're going to take these one section or one division at a time. So Department of Corrections come up first, and we'll go to Community Corrections, Transfer Board, and then Sentencing Commission. Yeah, before we do that, Robert, I think you were going to give a summary of how the budget manual works. They don't want to listen to you. They're all leaving. Here, yeah. Here, take mine. You don't need to follow along. Take mine. You get around.
You didn't come prepared?
Thanks. All right, let's give them just a minute to make their way out. If you got a conversation, you're in the audience, we want to kind of continue on today. If you could take your conversation outside, please. Again, thank you for being here, but if you've got a conversation, there's plenty of room out front to have your conversation. Go ahead and take it out. We're about to begin on the next section. All right, I don't think I want to ask again. So if you've got a conversation that you need to have, take it out. Everybody was really respectful. When higher ed was up, let's show the same courtesy. All right, thank you. You're welcome to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Robert Breck with DFA. I just wanted to go over, or I was asked to go over the budget manual and just sort of how it works. Some of you may not be aware of it, some may have forgotten, but this will just be an overview on what the manual shows. There's a lot of really good information in here. If you're wanting to find that on any particular part of a department, you can find it, and I'll kind of demonstrate how the budget manual is put together and how you can do that. If you go to page 2 of the manual, and I believe all of yours are like the one I'm looking at, it's going to be after the red tabs. You're going to see a table of contents for the budget manuals. And keep in mind that these budget manuals are only going to be for the big 6 agencies. It's not going to be for every department. But you'll see a table of contents, and I'll just start at the first and show you kind of how it works with the Department of Corrections. If you go to page 2, what that's going to show, this is an overview of the Department of Corrections, and it's going to show, if you look at the top line, those are appropriations for the agency, and if you look at the bottom part of the table, those are the funding portions. But what you can see, if you just go to the top line, you'll see county jail reimbursement. You'll see the actuals from 22-23. Those are actual numbers for appropriation. If you look below there, those would be the actual numbers for funding. You can see that they didn't have a fund balance to start off with. You can see how much general revenue they got.
Just real quick, because I was even confused on this. I didn't find it the first time I went through. It's the last red tab in your binder. Is what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's about halfway through your binder if you want to try to find it. But you can see, and I'll just use county jail reimbursement. It's the first one on the line, and it may be a topic of conversation anyway. But you can see the Department of Corrections, their appropriation summary on page 2. And you can see within the Department of Corrections, and this would be the parent agency, you have county jail reimbursement, county detention facility reviewed, the Department of Correction, criminal detention committee expenses, and transportation of juvenile offenders. This is kind of a good example because juvenile offenders was transferred to public safety and along with the criminal detention facility review, so I'll kind of show you how that worked. But you can see the actuals from 22-23. Since we've already closed that out, you can see the actuals. You can see the percentage of where their funding came from. Then you can look at the next columns. You can see the current fiscal year, and that's 23-24, which would be fiscal year 24. You can see what was authorized by the legislature, by the acts. You can see the budget. Oftentimes, those will be pretty closely aligned. You can see where they expect their revenue to come from. And then you can go on to 24-25. That's what we're going to be looking at now. The legislative recommendation that you see is a carryover from the general session. Then you've got the agency request. And I mentioned that, for instance, the transportational juvenile offenders, you're going to see a 0 for agency request in the last columns for executive recommendation and agency request. That's because that was actually transferred to the Department of Public Safety. So that's the summary for that department. If you go to page 4, I'll just kind of show you how each one of these items, and you'll see E68 county jail reimbursement. Each one of those items is going to have its own page, and you can drill down into what is actually shown on that page. So the way the manual works, you've got the department broken down into segments, and then everything rolls back up to the top when you do the funding. But if you're interested in any particular item, any part of a department, you can drill down in these manuals and find it. And I'll be glad to help anyone. If anybody wants to ask any questions, or if you want to meet with me privately, I'd be more than happy to show any of you any of this information should you need it. But if you go to page 4, you'll see that the appropriations for refunds and reimbursements, and this is for the county jail reimbursement. You'll see that at the top. And so you can see that their total funding for 22-23 was $26,850,000. Then you can see what was authorized in 23-24 is slightly more than that. You can see the budget, and then you can see what they're requesting for in 24 and 25. I only bring this one up. I think it's a good example. Although it's the first one in the manual, it's also going to be a topic of conversation because they're actually going to be running a little short in this particular line item, and they'll be asking for a supplemental funding in the fiscal session because they're actually running a little short. As you'll recall, we went from $32 to $40 on the county jail reimbursement, and that's obviously a huge increase, and that is, it has had an impact on the budget, but obviously it's helped those county jails with their funding. So if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them. And like I said, I'll be more than happy to meet with any of you privately if you want to. If you don't want to ask any questions publicly, I certainly understand. But there are no dumb questions, and it's really easy. Once you figure out the manual, it's really easy to drill down into a specific department or a division and see exactly where the money is. Now some people will tell you, some departments will tell you, just give me the money and we'll just spend it. We don't need any of this. There may be some secretaries who could handle that. I'm sure there are. But this really keeps the budget in check. And it shows how everything is funded, and it shows how every dollar is appropriated. And I think it's very helpful. Now, I'll just go ahead and throw this out for Representative Wooten, because I'm sure he's going to be interested in the interest income. Keep in mind that this is an abbreviated budget manual. It's not the full budget manual that we would typically have in a full session. But I have asked and requested a report of all the interest that will be accumulated or earned by every agency, and I'll get that report to you.
All right, thank you. And members, and while we're moving through, what we'll be asking for is an exec rec. I mean, if you make a legislative recommendation, for instance, or make that motion, that's going to be without any additional legislation that may have occurred throughout the course of last session. So the exec rec would be more true. I would anticipate, as I think they've discussed, a number of governor's letters, so these things will adjust, but that will not happen until we get into session. What we're doing here is just going through and allowing these appropriations to be drafted, again, knowing that there will be some changes to those appropriations through the form of governor's letters. Again, so we'll be looking for exec recs as we're moving through. With that, does anybody, I've got 3 on the board. Are these questions for him about the manual and how the manual works? Everybody? No? If it's not for Robert and how the manual works, go ahead and let's work backwards. So Senator Johnson, you're with the manual.
I'm not sure who this would be 4, but this is on page 4 where you just went over, Robert, the county jail reimbursement.
Right.
I get 26.8 million. What I don't get is what I call the demand is, and
Right.
that's is there a number you can give me that our sheriffs will tell us this is what we're actually going to need in aggregate?
Right, and we've been talking to the Department of Corrections about what's needed. We know the 26 point isn't quite enough. They're averaging, I may miss this slightly, around 1,850 prisoners per day. Right now,
State prisoners.
State prisoners in the county jails.
In the county, yes,
Yeah,
sir,
they're
that's
averaging about 1,850. That's a little bit, they're going to be a little bit short with the 26.8. They think they're going to be averaging more than that. I'll just tell you that the executive recommendation would be $4.2 million in addition to that. That will, we think that will adequately take care of any demand of the county jails. It should, and they do have carry forward language as well. So if they don't use that funding, they can use it in the next.
And I believe you said that would be in a requested supplemental.
That's
for
right.
the fiscal session.
Yeah, we do agree that
4.2 would be in the
That's
for
right.
the
We do
supplemental.
agree they'll run short, so they do need more funding.
Okay, all right. And I know that's a moving target, but anyway, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Springer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up with the request regarding agency accounts that have interest bearing. I'm particularly interested in an account at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. There's an account that they have that possibly is drawing interest. So,
Our accounting division is working on a report now for all the departments. I assume they can get that for the higher ed institutions. I'm not certain on that, but I'll certainly check on it.
please,
And I'll get that to you.
very
Yes.
interested. It has about $1.5 million
Yes.
in it. So.
All right, thank you. Senator Chesterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and perhaps it would be better to wait for the Department of Corrections, but I would be interested in knowing how many women are working in those institutions. And that has been something that has been brought to my attention, that a large number of those individuals who are charged with keeping the prisoners safe, if you will, are women. I'd just like to know how many women are actually working in the Department of Corrections.
And I don't have that number, but we do have a woman that's heading the Department of Corrections now, and I want to apologize to her publicly. We put the secretary's name in the budget manual. We misspelled her name. She was actually named the secretary the day before we were printing these manuals. I wanted to make sure we got her name in here. Wanted to make sure it was ended in AY. Unfortunately, they transposed a couple of them. So it's not Lindsay, it's actually Lindsay, and I apologize to her publicly, and I've done so privately as well.
Okay. Well, we'll forgive you this time.
All right, thank you. Any other, sorry.
Just need to know how many women, how many female guards you have, and I think that would be interesting to know.
I'll leave that for the department.
All right, thank you so much, Rob.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. All right, and then we're going to move on. All right, Secretary Wallace, I think you're presenting first.
Give a summary.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll have a summary. Where are we? There we go. Dalton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Dalton Coleman with the Bureau of Legislative Research. I know you just heard a lot about this, but I would feel bad if I didn't tell you myself. So we'll start on page 2 with the Department Appropriation Summary for the Department of Corrections Administration and Shared Services. All right, so looking at the far right executive recommendation column for fiscal year 25, shared services totals out at $187,025,249 for the upcoming fiscal year. This does look a little different. There's a couple of appropriations zeroed out. Those have not been discontinued. Those are transferred to the Department of Public Safety, and that's criminal detention facility review, criminal detention committee expenses, and transportation of juvenile offenders. That was Act 306 of 2023 that moved those over to public safety. So we'll talk about those on Friday for the public safety presentation. Looking at page 4, we can move on to county jail reimbursement. We have a total of $26,853,607 there. And as Mr. Breck mentioned, we are paying them $40 a day per inmate. And lastly, we have the Department of Corrections cabinet level appropriation on page 8. The total there is $160,171,642. Happy to get any specifics and questions, but Mr. Chair, there are no significant change levels in that appropriation. With that, happy to take any questions.
Thanks, sir. Members, we're going to open up for questions. Senator Chesterfield.
Mine is the same. It's not for Dalton, but it is for the department. What ratio of your guards are female?
Thank you, Senator Chesterfield. Lindsay Wallace, Cabinet Secretary, and I will apologize in advance for my voice. I've been fighting an upper respiratory infection, so I apologize to you all. We have not run those numbers recently, but the last count, we were over 50% female in our staffing ratios. I can get you the more accurate numbers, but I know that
these are the guards who interact every day with the prisoners?
Yes, ma'am.
It's over 50% female?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, that's what I needed to know. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. All right, Representative Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question about the transportation of juveniles. If you can explain what that is, and are those just juveniles committed to the Department of Correction, or is there any contact with juveniles in DYS?
So I actually think that you're talking about the portion that's been transferred to public safety.
Okay.
The criminal detention facility standards do not fall underneath the Department of Corrections anymore. Okay. So I think they'll be better served to answer that question for you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Representative Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Morford. Thank y'all. Mine's going to be dealing with the shared service paying, which is on our page 8. Just real quick. So instead of putting the medical contracts in professional, you're actually separating that out. Is that what I see is happening? So we'll have a better idea what's going on with the medical services.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then the other question I have, if I haven't lost my mind, on the regional jails, we got $8.7 million.
I'm gonna let Mr. Brown answer this question, but I do believe that fund balance is at zero. We reallocated that money under the previous administration to help with the White River Detention Center remodel so that we could open up that as a community corrections center. Okay. But I'm gonna pass the mic to Mr. Brown.
Chad Brown, Chief Financial Officer, Department of Corrections. Representative Kavanaugh, Secretary Wallace is correct. That's one appropriation that we don't see the need for right now. We've already exhausted that fund, so we're on to our other funds for the White River construction. So
we could do away with that appropriation?
Yes, ma'am. I talked and conferred with my staff, and we can do away with that.
Mr. Chair, that would be my motion when we get here, is to get rid of that appropriation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Senator Hammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tagging on to that subject, could you give us the update on bed capacity and with the White River remodel? Just kind of give us a snapshot, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hammer. So White River has a capacity of around 170, and we're looking to finish that out in the next few months and hopefully have bodies in those beds early part of the fiscal year. August is kind of what we're looking at.
Okay. And by the way, congratulations
on
your appointment. A good choice, in my opinion. The other question I have is, eventually we're going to get a new jail or new prison, which should release some of the capacity. And if I'm misstating anything, if I'm mischaracterizing anything, straighten me out. But it should release some of the capacity into the county jail level. Although we know we got a high number of misdemeanors that can backfill those spaces. But how do you see it playing out if the new prison is about 3 years out, 4, we don't know? How do you see it playing out as far as affecting your budget when county jail reimbursement may not be as big of a need, or do you anticipate it will always be a need? And just kind of give us some of your insight on that,
Sure.
please.
So to deal with the beds issues, we've done a lot internally to try to bring the numbers down for county jail backup. We've added approximately 1,400. The Board of Corrections has approved around 1,400 beds. Looking at our staffing ratios and everything like that to help alleviate some of that. But as you can see, and as Mr. Breck testified to, the amount of expenses for county jail reimbursement is still there. I was speaking with the Sheriff's Association earlier. They have a lot of unserved warrants that are out there. I know we have absconders that we could bring in. I expect we'll probably always have some need for county jail reimbursement. In the intermediary, we've talked also about the need for looking at out-of-state beds. We don't know exactly what that need is at this point, but we know that we feel like we've done everything within our existing structures. We have a couple of places where there used to be a community corrections center in the Pine Bluff complex. Chairman Magnus has mentioned to both myself and Director Payne that he wanted us to look at trying to figure out a way to utilize that structure for something for bed alleviation as well. So to be able to give you like a finite answer as far as budget, I'm not certain at this point in time, but I think there's going to be a continuing need, especially with the PROTECT Act, that we bring more beds online, and if we don't, then county jails are going to have to help us alleviate that burden.
And I would just say this, if we're entertaining the idea of out-of-state beds, I would prefer to expand the county jail capacity and work out some arrangement to keep those inmates in-state as opposed to that.
Okay.
So I would advocate for an expansion of the county jails if we could work out that arrangement between the department and the county. So I would just like to get that out there in the open.
Yes,
Thank you.
sir.
Thanks, Senator Hammer. Senator Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've discussed this, Secretary Wallace, and I just want to make the point here that I know we're talking about bringing more beds online. That's been a big topic of discussion over a long period of time, and I just want to make sure that we're not looking only at maximum security beds, that we're also looking at possibly reentry beds, treatment beds, beds for community correction, and that sort of thing. And is that part of the department's plan?
Yes, absolutely. Some of those beds that I'd mentioned that we brought online over the department, over 211 of those were in the community corrections centers. So we're absolutely looking at that. We're also looking at streamlining our reentry services department-wide and being more inclusive between the divisions so that we have a better stream from incarceration to community. We're looking at all of those things. Yes, sir.
Okay, sounds good. I'd love to be engaged in those discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
C21. What is that? Where is that? Oh, Representative Wooten, you're recognized.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good appointment. On the report I have here, they have 6,314 positions. 40, that includes corrections, community, parole, and sentencing commission. Of those, 4,527 is in the Department of Corrections. And of that, 4,500, of them are vacant, have been vacant over 2 years. Is that security personnel that you can't fill the positions, or?
The great majority of those are, yes. I think there's some mental health positions and some maintenance positions that are included in those as well. But the great majority are security positions, yes, sir.
Do you know of the 357 that are vacant throughout your department, each division, do you know how many of those are budgeted positions?
I do not have that information. I can get it for you, but I don't have it.
Okay, we'd like to have that for the Personnel Committee.
Yes, sir.
And of the 281, how many of them are security people?
Okay. Yes, sir.
And the community corrections, where is the parole officers in these numbers? Is that in the community corrections? How many do you have? What's your ratio of parolees versus parole officers?
If I can have Deputy Director Taylor join us at the table, she can help us answer those questions.
If you could just recognize yourself for the committee.
Elizabeth Taylor, Deputy Director for Community Supervision. Okay, so for probation and parole officers, there are actually vacant 54 positions.
There are 54 vacant?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And those are budgeted.
How many total do you have?
Authorized is 526.
How many?
526. It's a 10.2% vacancy ratio.
Okay. So what's the ratio parolee to parole officers?
Okay. Fully staffed is 1 to 80.
1 to 80. Mm-hmm. Is the national average still in the 60 range?
60 to 80.
60 to 80. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And how many vacant positions did you say you had in the parole officers?
For officers, it is 54.
Okay.
For total, there's 3 supervisors also,
right.
So that would put it at 57.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you. All right. Senator Flowers.
Thank you. Congratulations, Secretary. I want to know, I kind of came in on the end of the line of questions and comments from Senator Hammer. Is there something budgeted for housing inmates out of state in your budget?
No, ma'am, not at this time. There's not. When we started having discussions with the administration related to the need for immediate, intermediate, and long-term beds, that was part of the discussion. But we started with what can we do internally before we moved to even looking at what a budgeted amount would be for out-of-state beds. So no, ma'am, there's nothing in there at this point related to any sort of out-of-state beds.
Well, I hope that it doesn't get on the table either. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you. Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this question may be for you. I know there's been a lot of discussion about conversations that we're going to have during session. I know the jail reimbursement rate, the county jail reimbursement rate is a topic. But the comment that I heard earlier, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, was that there wasn't quite enough, or there might be a little short, it maybe is how you termed it, in the current number of the 26 million. But did that take into consideration any kind of increase in the reimbursement rate or anything like that? Because my county jail guys are saying that they're almost to below break even on housing the state inmates. And so just curious about that, and I know we'll have more conversations later.
I may let Mr. Brown answer this. In 2022, the rate went up to 40. It was $32 before that, so there was a pretty significant jump from 2020 was when it became that amount to what it is in 2022. I understand what you're saying about it not covering all of their expenses. I think that fluctuates from county to county. That's not something that we set. I believe the governor's office in this body is who kind of perpetuates whatever that rate is. We're just the pass-through for that account. Do you have anything, Chad?
So some of their concerns may be comparing what our cost per day is in the Department of Corrections versus what their cost per day is in the county. So like Secretary Wallace said, we pay $40 a day per inmate. Our cost per day on our side per inmate is $69.59. Our monthly expense average, if we go back to July 2023, remains around $2.3 million a month in expenditures. The DFA disperses monthly allotments to us. We expense those. If we have any left over, those goes to the next month's expenses for county jail reimbursement. And like Mr. Breck said, we're going to be requesting $4.2 million come the fiscal session. But as of now, that's where we stand.
Follow up here. So I've heard in the higher education discussion talking about, you know, the competing for talent. And I know we currently have just a blanket rate, as I understand it, across the state. But I think what it costs in Northwest Arkansas is not the same as it may be in South Arkansas, and in Crawford County may be different because we're competing with, you know, the folks across the river. So I understand the $69, and I was previously on city council, and so I'm familiar with the reimbursement rates. But I just want to make sure that there's room for discussion on that as well. I don't want to go back and face the sheriffs and potential lockup if we don't have that discussion.
Sure. All right, who we got? Representative Wooten.
I want to follow up on the cost of maintaining the state prisoners in county jails. What is the policy that y'all operate under relative to who stays in the county jail and who goes, or how do you make that decision? And the reason I'm asking is because my philosophy on that is as soon as they are found guilty, then they become state prisoners, okay? Where I run into a conflict is a two-edged sword. Some sheriffs say, well, hey, we need that money to be able to maintain our detention centers. And so when you go to talking about creating enough space at the prison system to handle those, then you're cutting their income. But how do y'all make a decision relative to who stays in a county jail? And is it totally on space, or is it?
Yes, that is the number one thing. I mean, we're bringing them in fast as we can at this point. Director Payne brought in 30 the other day just alone. So for us, it's a capacity issue. We would love to bring as many as we possibly can, but at this point, we don't have the capacity to do so. What I have kind of heard the number, we're over 2,000 in our county jail backup at this point. Somewhere between 1,500 to 1,800 is kind of the number that I've always looked at as an acceptable number, and I understand the funding issue and the mechanism that it is used to help supplement with them. Director Payne, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, we are bringing them in. We bring in inmates normally at least three times a week. So we do bring in big groups, and we bring in as many as we can. We're maxed out now. We've got inmates everywhere. So we just bring them in as they come. Oftentimes we'll get calls from counties that say, "Hey, I'm maxed out. You know, can you help me?" So then I'll divert from the county jail list, and I'll go to that county and try to help them out.
And Mr. Brown, y'all provide some services in the penitentiary or in the prison system that they don't provide in the county jail, mental health and things like that. So that makes the $27 difference in what it costs you and what it costs the county jails. How much? Do they all cost about the same, or do y'all do a report from the county that says it cost us $55? You know.
I believe the counties actually do a report on that. We do not track that information.
Okay. I know that in White County it cost us about $300,000 a year out of our budget. But at the same time, the money that they receive helps operate the detention center. So, but your main policy is capacity.
Yes, sir.
When you have it, you get them and take them in.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. what are we building now, 1,000?
So what we're looking at is a 3,000 bed
3,000.
facility, yes, sir. Which obviously, if it was here today, it would take care of all the county jail backup if we were able to move everybody in today. But yes, sir, that's what we're looking at is that 3,000 bed facility, and then the additional technical violator beds that we talked about at the White River, which is a small little subset, but it's a significant amount of people for the county sheriffs as well.
All right, thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we talk about the expanding the beds, I'm curious to know what is the cost to do that as opposed to moving those same inmates at a reimbursement rate to another state? Is there any savings in moving them rather than creating the additional beds?
Do you have numbers on
I don't have the exact numbers on that, but I would think it'd be about the same amount.
Yeah.
About the same?
About the same.
Could you verify that? Would you guys be able to verify that information?
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
All right, Senator Hammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're budgeting out to the 24-25 on the new jail location. Do we have the site picked out? Do we have the plans developed? Do we have an estimated date as of right now as to when that would start?
So at this time, we're still kind of drilling down into the data to try to find the most right location. Kind of all pointers seem to be leading to that kind of I-40 corridor. We don't have any facilities between Conway and Fort Smith. I know there have been some sites that have been spotted. I don't believe anything has been specifically identified at this point. That's kind of the starting point. We're trying to make sure we have the workforce, we have the infrastructure needs, all of the big things that we look for whenever we're trying to put a new facility in. Just trying to make sure we get the most right location for what we're looking for. But we're moving as fast as we can, but that's where we are right now, still trying to identify the perfect location.
Okay, so with regards to the budget and with regards to what we're going to be reimbursing county jails, knowing there's going to be a gap between the 2024 to 2025 and when that new prison is built, you got truth in sentencing coming down that's going to hit us before we have capacity to take care of it. What is going to be the solution? And do we need to look at more money to be able to be prepared for that solution? But you can have all the money in the budget you want, but if you don't have spots to put them, we got a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a capacity issue for us. It's always been a capacity issue for us for a long time. So trying to get that moving as fast as we can. And I know no one is really in favor of moving out to out-of-state beds, but whether it be expanding county jail operations, there's going to be a need for some additional capacity, I believe, at some point. Whether, like I said, it's at the county level or we look at out-of-state beds. All options, as far as I know, are on the table. We've talked about kind of all of these with the governor's office and the Department of Finance and Administration, and I believe that there is ample support of whatever needs to be done. It's just arriving at the timing and figuring out the right amount.
So am I right in my perception that with truth in sentencing coming down, the limited capacity, the board not being willing to expand the beds, you've inherited that history, then we are down to either more money to be able to send them out of state until we can develop our interior capacity, either at the county jail level or through what Senator Tucker mentioned a while ago about maybe, with the step down units, I'll call them.
Sure.
Otherwise, we're going to be turning them loose, which will be a decision at the local level. So is this the time to look at increasing this number so that we are able to fulfill what truth in sentencing was intended to do, either by sending them out of state where capacity is until we can get that county? What is your thought on that?
I wish I had the projections for what the Truth in Sentencing, the PROTECT Act numbers showed. I know that there were some timelines that were put in place to kind of push off the true impact related to prison capacity. I'm not certain of what the answer is to that as far as the exact dollar amount. I will say that, we meet with the Sentencing Commission, we meet with the board, we meet with the governor's office, and we're talking about all of this stuff. So I think everybody is aware of what you're talking about. This is going to have an impact on the state and trying to get to the right solution. I'm just sitting here right in front of you right now. I'm not sure what that right solution is at this moment.
Okay, and the budget you got figured is for a $40 reimbursement rate, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, Representative, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right here. Have you given any thought to maybe some alternative housing? I know in the long run it probably wouldn't help your bottom line as far as money from what you pay the county jails, but it seems to me like with as many disabled inmates that we have in wheelchairs and that kind of thing, that with nursing homes, that kind of things that are available in the state, that would be better to me, seem like, than going out of state. And also, even though it might not help your bottom line any, it would certainly help the sheriffs across the state that are just cram-packed trying to find places for these people to stay and stay within guidelines to keep from breaking the law. So is there any thought to that?
Yes, sir. I wish I had the numbers in front of me. I actually had our research team pull kind of aging population numbers for me the other day, and it's not a small number that we have. Our population is aging, and I think you're right. There is a need for us to look at what we could do to better utilize our space for that population. Director Payne and I, and actually Mr. Brown, we've all kind of had these discussions. We've kind of preliminarily talked with UAMS to see if maybe there's any way that we could look at any of their buildings that they have on their complex to transition something into a secure setting for us very early on in the discussions. I've spoken with Mr. Magnus about this specifically. You mentioned nursing homes. To answer your question, we're looking at all of it. We know that this is a very large problem that we've got to get under wraps, and we are looking at every avenue possible.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate you doing that. I hope maybe we can look at something like that, because even if we build, we're talking a couple of years away, we're still going to be backed up. So anyway, I appreciate your time and thought on that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and some of these questions, do we have any board members here that might be able to help with some vision of what they're looking to do?
No, sir. Mr. Magnus wanted to come, but he wasn't able to travel today. So.
Mr. Watson, no one else is able to be here?
No, nobody else is here.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. Senator Payton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm over here to your left. So as we talk about this 3,000 bed facility, that sounds rather large, and of course location is going to be very hard to choose, and workforce going to have a huge requirement. Have we thought about building 3 1,000 bed facilities, and of course they could come online much quicker than one 3,000 bed facility?
I don't think anything is off the table at this point. The idea with the 3,000 bed facility that we kind of, when we were speccing this out with our architect, was to have something that was like a complex. So you'd have like 1,000 beds here that maybe were maximum security beds, and then 1,000 beds here that were, reentry beds or something, and then 1,000 more over here. So they're not all in, like we have traditionally very large facilities in the state. So more of like a complex that had some shared services space.
Well, my thoughts are, that presents some huge challenges in finding the location and the workforce and the contractor. I mean, compared to getting started quicker with, 3 smaller facilities or 2 smaller facilities. I don't know. So it's all on the table right now. We're not settled into this 3,000 bed facility.
No, sir. I think we were looking at it in terms of if you were able to do a complex like that, you wouldn't have to have a medical team or a dental team or all of the range of services at 3 different locations. So you would get some efficiencies from an economy of scale that's kind of the perspective we were looking at from that.
Well, I agree. I mean, in business, economy of scale plays a factor, but
Sure.
sometimes when that scale gets so large, it becomes a negative gain.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, and then on this, and we're a little bit off the appropriation. I appreciate the discussion, and that's fine. But one of the things that I think there's someone that is setting a schedule and a timeline. We've been looking to build a prison for I don't know how many years now. We've actually obligated money and set it aside for the construction of prison, and it seems like we're pretty stagnant in even determining a location. And then if I kind of understand the way things are seen right now, at least by the board, that this is their call. And at this point, they've tasked y'all with trying to find some locations, but for whatever reason, there's no push to finalize and get actual movement on what we're going to do. So the longer we delay, even though the funds are in hand, the longer it's going to be to set it up, and the farther out we push these issues with county jail reimbursement and everything else. And so I think what the questions that we're having in regards to what are we even going to, we feel like we're in an infant state right now in even talking about it. Is it 1,000 bed prison? Is it a 3,000 bed prison? And there's a reason for that. It's because no one is making the decision to move forward. I'm not saying that's y'all's task, because it's not. The board has been very clear that it is their purview on when and how we move, at least in the current standing. So I think what we may need to do, and that's part of the reason I asked if there were any members here today, is to have that conversation with them about, is there a timeline? I mean, have they said to y'all, hey, we want to have a site selection of 3 places by July 1st? And I think the answer is no. Well, it's hard to ever, I mean, I put things off as long as I possibly can, just like people naturally do. And I think that's where we are. So that's what, I don't know what the proper committee is to have that discussion, but that's where we need to be having the discussion. If the board is going to maintain that they are in sole authority of when and where and how a prison is going to be constructed, and we're concerned about when and where and how, then we need to be asking them. Senator Hill.
Thank you, Senator Dismang. Over here.
Yes, sir.
And congratulations, as everyone else has told you on your new position. My question is kind of simple. I've heard different figures from different legislators and all about cost for out of state, cost per day. Have y'all got any quotes from anyone out of state, let's say whether it be Mississippi, Texas, Missouri, Louisiana, or anywhere else, to just kind of give us a figure for a comparison?
Yes, Director Payne, Mr. Magnus actually tasked Director Payne with taking a look at some out-of-state beds, so I'm going to defer to him and let him give you a little bit of information that he has.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. We have talked with a couple companies about moving beds to Texas, Georgia, and I had one even talk about Michigan. But they're gonna charge us probably about the same that we pay. Our cost per day in Arkansas is, so it'll be about the same amount of money.
Roughly, what is that cost?
Approximately $70 a day.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, does that include the medical?
Yes, sir.
On both sides?
Yes, sir, both sides.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Representative Rose.
Over here on your right. Thank you. I just was curious if you could reiterate, that was $70 a day was the average pay rate for out of state. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, sir. That's the price that was quoted to me.
And I understand you've already spoke to this. Just kind of wanted to hear it again. We're saying we're paying the county jails $40 a day, knowing that they're taking a hit. And then we're recognizing that we could pay out of state at $70 a day, which I know that's comparable to the rate that you're paying, $69.50. But I just kind of wanted to say we're hitting our county jails for $30 less than we're willing to pay somebody out of state. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, and that includes programming and medical in that cost.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So can you break down then what the programming and medical would be above and beyond? So I mean, if you excluded that from our cost, and you may not have it today, but that way we're apples to apples and making things make sense. There's lots of things that happen in the state prisons that are not happening in the county jails.
Yes, sir.
And there comes a cost with that. Again, so if you can just kind of give us a breakdown of what that looks like, and we know it's not going to be the same amongst each, I mean, just on average. Senator Hammer.
This chair and staff, Mr. Chair, the money that's been allocated for the construction of the new prison, refresh my memory, have we already turned that loose, or are we still maintaining control of that as legislature?
We've turned loose some of it at the request of the department, if I remember right, last year. I think that's correct. And then there's another set aside. Is it still sitting there? Okay, yeah, we're still sitting on it, waiting for the request.
So it's still under our purview and still under our authority. Is that for was it 350 million, or what's the number we're sitting on?
How much? 300 even? 335.
335. So they're going to have to, whenever they get off center and come back to us, they're going to have to come back to us for the approval. In the meantime, if there were other alternatives or other measures that were determined, we could, as a legislative branch, insert ourselves in order to see that money could be spent elsewhere, or could be spent on another approach. Are we totally waiting on them, or what authority do we have that we could bring something forward?
I mean, I would be nervous about utilizing our one-time set-aside for prison construction on what would be ongoing cost, and we're also allowing, the game to continue, or whatever we want to call it at this point. Members in this room have been adamant that they don't want to see prisoners go out of state. Why are prisoners going to go out of state? Because of inaction here. Not by us. We've done our part. We set the money aside multi-years ago. There has been inaction by the board on even a site selection. And if a prisoner goes out of state, it is because of their inaction. And that's the way that I see it. And so, I hope, again, there'll be proper committees. Maybe, I don't know who it is. JPR, I think we've got a corrections subcommittee in ALC, but we need to have a discussion about what the actual plan is on how we move forward with a prison construction. Because if we don't, then your county jails are going to continue to talk about how they're underfunded. And then ultimately, we're going to find ourselves in a position of having to send people out of state because we have been derelict in our duties, or someone else has, of getting this constructed and done. I'm disappointed. I think, like most of you, we set this money aside a long time ago, and it is just setting. And it doesn't need to be setting. It needs to be put to use, and we need to be moving forward.
All right, thank you. Lindsay, I'd like to put on the table for you to look at building 70 at Haskell. It's not my district, so I'm not self-serving. Y'all need to go down and take a look at that one. It might be a good option for you to deal with. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Payton, you're recognized.
And this is for the chair and staff. That money that's set aside, does it accrue any interest, or?
It accrues interest, yes, sir.
Okay, do we know what rate or anything?
I don't, but we can find it. We'll get.
Does it halfway keep up with inflation, or are we losing ground every year?
It's probably not going to keep up with inflation just on a risk side.
So,
but yeah.
Thank you for saying we need to expedite this. Appreciate it.
Sir. All right, members, I think that's kind of cleared the board as far as questions, and we're still on G, kind of the part one. If you flip to your packet here, so that's county jail reimbursement, criminal detention facility review, Department of Correction, criminal detention, community expenses, and transportation of juvenile offenders. Representative Kavanaugh, I believe, has a motion she would like to make, and that was with that omission. So I'm going to recognize you for that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I make a motion that we accept executive recommendation with the exception of the regional jails appropriation, which is under the shared services paying section of the Department of Corrections on page number 8.
All right, thank you. Members, we have a motion. We have a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion carries. We're going to be on Dexter Payne. You are recognized for Division of Correction. Sorry, I keep jumping over you, man. You're recognized for the summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you'll flip with me to page 14 of your manuals, we'll look at the Division of Correction, Department Appropriation Summary there. So at far right column again, the division totals out at $404,118,036 for the fiscal year 25 recommendation. There are not any significant change levels here, but I would like to go over the main operating appropriation on page 22, and that's also known as the inmate care and custody appropriation. This is mostly a GR appropriation with a little bit of special revenue and cash as well. The total there is $344,768,509. And being that there are no change levels in that appropriation or any others, I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have about specifics.
We got any questions, Mr. Coleman? Department, y'all have anything to add?
No, sir, we're here if you have questions.
Need a motion, exec rec. Have a motion and a second. Hold on. Senator Gilmore, you got a question?
No, sir, we're already moving to a motion. That's perfect for me.
Okay. Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Coleman?
All right, so moving on to the Division of Community Correction, which is on page 37 of your manuals. The total for this department is $137,796,222. Again, I'll touch on the main operations appropriation, which is page 43. And the total there is $119,273,706. Mr. Chairman, same thing as the last division. Not really any significant changes within this appropriation or the other ones in the division, so happy to answer the questions again.
Any questions? Mr. Coleman? Department, y'all got anything you want to say? Need a motion, executive rec. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Mr. Coleman?
All right, moving on to Post-Prison Transfer Board. That's page 48 of your manuals. So the only thing different here is that it used to be called the Parole Board, and that changed this past session. So the Post-Prison Transfer Board operating appropriation totals out at $2,450,475. There are no significant change levels in this appropriation either, so open it for questions.
Any questions, Mr. Coleman? Department, y'all good? Need a motion, executive rec. We have one and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Coleman?
All right, now on to page 51 for the Sentencing Commission. Much of the same here, not any significant change levels, but the total for fiscal year 25 recommendation is $497,495. Happy to answer any questions about that one too.
Any questions, Mr. Coleman? Department, you good? Motion, executive rec. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Mr. Coleman?
Mr. Chair, that's all we got for
Is that
the
it?
corrections.
I'm passing. All right, that does us. We're going to start tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with DHS and the Public School Fund. Appreciate it. I don't have a gavel in here. Yeah. We're done.